All right. Well, everyone, thank you for being here today, for joining us. Equity Summit 2021. I am thoroughly enthralled with the opportunity to be here, the opportunity to have you all and be your moderator or your host today. And just in a nutshell, to be able to share our collective wisdom, that we have accumulated through our business and academic experiences, and be able to disseminate that back out into a platform where others can take it in and can actually be able to execute and be able to help each other and then improve communities as well. So that's our purpose here today, and I'm just thoroughly excited. So I am, as I said, the moderator today for the session, Dr. Joshua D. Dorsey. Please say the D. Not really, it's just my middle name. And there's another person who has the same name as me, so I have to distinguish myself. I am a transformative consumer researcher. I am on faculty at Cal State Fullerton, out on the West Coast. So plenty of sunshine out here, and still struggling. I've been 4 years and still trying to get adapted to that 3 hour time difference. I'm an East Coaster, born and raised. So um, we have an esteemed panel here today, and I am just honored to be in the presence of some of you all here. I have done my homework, and I will say that again, that collective knowledge and that collective wisdom is something that I'm proud to be a part of, and I'm sure anyone who's watching today will also find it a robust session and full of great knowledge that they can use and pass on. So, who's with us today? That would be Scott Case, co-founder and CEO of Upside. We have DJ Lewis, Chief Program Officer of the Humble Hustler Foundation. We have Taj Eldridge, Senior Director of Investment and GP, Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. So, did I miss anybody? I want to make sure anyone didn't sneak in on the call there. Do we have
Lanier Richardson's here as well.
Okay, yes, sir. Well, appreciate it. My good friend from Rutgers University, please welcome Lanier Richardson as well, Executive Director, excuse me, CUEED, and Assistant Director at Rutgers Business School. So, like I said, some familiar faces, and then everyone else, I've done my homework, and glad to welcome all of our esteemed panelists today. So, let me just check one more time, make sure no one else popped in. All right, fantastic. So let's get the ball rolling today, you all. What I had in mind for this, I always love when I have the opportunity to do these type of events. To start with a broad-based kind of brush stroke to make sure that we can paint a foundation for people to really understand some of the issues that are at hand here, and then also create a more narrow focus as we kind of continue through our discourse in the time that we have together. And then if we have time after that, then I want to try to take some questions that may hit into a little bit more nuance or idiosyncrasy in terms of the business community, especially as it pertains to people of color. So let's have that as a general agenda. And I want to just kind of start out with the foundational premise that entrepreneurship is important. I mean, you hear this all the time. We think about it all the time. We talk about it. And I think it's kind of a trendy thing. In some ways, I joke again with my brother, Dr. Otley, and we talk about all of the, digital CEOs that exist in the world or CEOs that exist on paper. Entrepreneurship is a great thing, but I also think that we really have to truly understand why it's important and the power of it, not only at that individual level, but collectively as we work to build these communities. So I want to just start with that foundational premise about entrepreneurship. Why is it important, and why should it be an aspiration? What are the functional things that entrepreneurship does? Besides I get to be CEO, and maybe I have a little bit of opportunity that can sustain myself. Why is it important for people from Black, Latinx, Indigenous backgrounds, particularly in the current economic state and the current economic climate? And that's where I want to start. just that general premise and laying the foundation down. So, whoever wants to jump in on that, I had no one's particular in mind for these questions. So, if you have a angle or a perspective on that, then please open the mic and join in.
Well, I'll start. And Joshua, as a fellow West Coaster, loving the sunshine we're having here. Sorry, East Coasters, I know you're super
Absolutely.
stoked some places. But for me, entrepreneurship is a tool in communities of color for wealth gap reduction.
Mm,
We talked about that, and I'm an economist by trade, so I look at the data, and since the 60s, the wealth gap we've had, some of the similar wealth gap, even though we've had advances in education. I think 4 out of the 5 of us are doctors, present company included, but we haven't had a jump in that divergence that we see in the wealth gap scenario. And I think even in my own family, we've seen it to where, and again, I'm going to mention more so entrepreneurship in tech, but entrepreneurship as a whole is a wealth gap reduction. But from a tech standpoint, my family has owned McDonald's for a number of years and have been very blessed and lucky to have the financial windfall from that. And it's taking a number of years to get that. I've ellipsed that in 5 years being in a tech investor. So the 25 plus years it took the family to make that capital from a McDonald's standpoint, the same one has happened from a tech standpoint. And so entrepreneurship is key for when we're talking about the need to have that reduction in wealth gap. And that's one of the things that I think communities of color should need it. And then lastly, I'll mention this, is that entrepreneurship, especially for communities of color that might be immigrants like my family, it's already embedded within us. We've had that. Some people might colloquially call them street entrepreneurs, but it's there. And we have it. And we have the hustle and the drive, the same one that we've seen in founders making these companies that are considered unicorns or what have you. So I think it's definitely something that's already embedded in communities of color.
fantastic. Thank you so much. Anyone else have a take on that?
I'm just gonna, echo that, right? So I have been summarizing it as, wealth is created by owning assets that generate revenue and appreciate over time. And so if we're talking about racial wealth gap closing, we're looking for ways to position people of color to own assets, businesses. Commercial real estate is where I spend a lot of my time as well, property that generates recurring revenue, appreciates over time, you can go on, have tax advantages and all of those things. So that's anything other than that is something other than racial wealth gap closing, right? Right. Whether entrepreneur, I mean, so I'm overstating it just a little bit, but if we're saying we want to attack the issue, education helps, capacity building helps, but getting capital and getting capacity building and rallying around creating our opportunity identification to help people own assets, businesses, property that generate recurring income and hopefully appreciate over time.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And just to jump in here, definitely some gems were just dropped about that wealth. Just giving a different perspective. Keyword for me is opportunity, and that's opportunity for life. That's opportunity to explore yourself. That's opportunity to say no. So that's something I tell some of my young boys a lot is it's okay if you flip pizzas or you work at the drive-thru. Those are necessary jobs. But if you want more, you want that opportunity to say XYZ, to say, I actually want to lead people instead of just doing XYZ. So entrepreneurship really stretches your mind and it gives you that ability and opportunity to take calculated risks and fail. So I feel like that's something that life will teach you regardless. But if you take that if you be proactive and you kind of jump on the reins and say, hey, let me try to solve a problem with business, that really says a lot about you and builds up your character.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Oh, I won't belabor it. You've all said brilliant things. I'm not sure I can follow up with much, but I will say that there is, as the representative middle-aged white guy in this conversation, I started like way up the ladder. And I think part of it is that it's not just generating and collapsing the wealth gap now, it's actually playing out the generational wealth gap, because what starts now pays dividends over long periods of time. And the more representation that you have of entrepreneurs that have created that wealth, the more it sort of begets others saying, I want what that is, right? And so you see that across lots of different categories of entrepreneurship. And I think that it's not just for today. It's, we've got a long history of not making it easy for people of color to be successful as entrepreneurs. And so part of it is paving that path to make it easier. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But a part of it's also recognition that it's not just about me and what I'm creating now. It is generational. It's about the advantages that my children have as a result of my entrepreneurial journey and the advantages I got from my parents. And so it's and the last I'll land on is that I've traveled all over the world. I've generally met with entrepreneurs everywhere, from tiny villages in let's see, Eastern Senegal to going to India, to working in all over the United States. And there's something about entrepreneurs that is, I don't know if it's wired in as humans, but there is a group of us as humans that are naturally inclined to want to create and lead something that, builds, creates value for others, and ultimately creates that wealth. And it shows up everywhere. It's just amazing. And it isn't for everybody. And I'm sure we can cover that too. As much as I'd like it to be for everybody, there is, I don't know where it is deep in our genetic trait that makes us just maybe a lunatic enough to decide that, I'm going to go do this instead of something that is vastly easier, or can certainly appear easier from the outside.
And Josh, let me add real quick, if I may, to the folks in the audience that may be listening. I want to give you this term that you may have not heard before, but you should, and that's intrapreneur, because that's something we need to recognize as well. If you've ever played a Game Boy, the little machine that your kid may have had, that was created by a maintenance man in Nintendo. If you've ever eaten flaming hot Cheetos, which you probably shouldn't, but if you have, that was created by somebody who had nothing to do with the production of that on that end. That was also in the space. So I want to kind of just throw it out there, because I think that that's something important for those who may think, well, am I failing by not being an entrepreneur, by being at a company? It goes back to what DJ was saying about it's an opportunity that you can create from those relationships that you have, even in the company that you're working at.
And just to say that a little bit further, I often give entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting a company, especially if they're early in their lives, to go join somebody else who's doing this, right? Because, being an entrepreneur, if you're trying to build anything of scale, going beyond yourself, you're going to need a team. And so joining a team and saying, maybe being the entrepreneur or the founder isn't the mode that I want to be in, but I like being in the environment that is about this. And I like contributing to that creation. To your point about intrapreneurship, you talked about some large companies, but small startups, somebody starting a franchise, a restaurant where I'm going to come in and I'm going to be the assistant manager and I'm going to make these things. All of that is important, because you are participating in the wealth creation activity, and you'll get some piece of it on your own, but it doesn't mean that everybody has to be a founder of one. Most substantial things are created with groups and teams.
Wow. All right. I could not have imagined a better cipher of responses to that question. So thank you all for the input. That was an amazing way to start off the session, and we'll dive a little bit deeper as we continue. So one thing that I want to put on the table next is this. A little bit of information for everyone who's out there watching. Again, just to lay a framework for what we're talking about here in this session, and a springboard into the next topic. So in the past 2 decades, so the past 20 years, the number of Black-owned businesses, and we're talking about with at least one paid employee here, has increased by approximately 31%, outpacing the 16.7% growth in the Black population during that same time frame. So 31% versus 16.7%. However, this constitutes a mere 2.2% of businesses nationwide. So, Black owned businesses with at least one paid employee, that's 2.2% of all businesses in our country. So, Black people currently, as of the last census, 13.4% of the US population, but only owning 2.2% of businesses that meet that criteria with one or more paid employee. Why does such a disparity exist still right now? The title of this session digs into access to capital, resources, and networks. So I want to ask, is it just merely the connections, right? The access to opportunity in terms of human capital and being plugged into networks where we can get those things accomplished, the human capital, so to speak, as we want to say it, or is it access to the actual money capital, those types of resources? I want to kind of get your perspectives on why there's such a stark disparity still exists, and why is it that we're not able to kind of propel ourselves yet over some of those barriers that we know have been placed societally and have been alluded to previously. So anyone want to touch on that one? That one goes deep. There's some layers there. So I'm wanting and eager to hear your responses.
Yeah, that's definitely a layered and complex conversation. And I'll tackle this one part of that, and I'll tackle the venture part of that, because we still have had some of the same issues with Black and brown founders and entrepreneurs in the venture side. As a VC here, one of the things I've seen in the early parts of my career was a lack of, and I think it's threefold, a lack of language, and understanding the language of venture. You know, a lot of times you would have founders who would come up and have these great ideas, but because there was a disconnect in the language, there was a disconnect in the capital allocation for that. So that was one of the issues. And we've been seeing that between various people in the industry, from friends of mine like Rashawn Williams and others who are doing great things to ensure that people have the knowledge and the vocabulary around what they're building, so that way they can have more robust conversations with investors. You know, he shout out to him putting this information on Instagram just for all people to access. So that's number one. Number two, I think that's what's been is that the capital, at least in venture, has been segregated literally to one area in the Bay Area. And you know, that kind of precluded a lot of people, because there used to be this joke that said that, no knock on my folks in the Bay Area, but they used to joke, they used to say, if you throw a rock in San Francisco, you hit a millionaire before you hit a person of color. And so the key that has been happening now is capital has been dispersed outside of the Bay to areas like I'm in LA, and even Riverside, where I was at before, where we had a venture fund there, to Dallas, Houston, Miami, all this stuff. So the democratization of capital is happening, and that's it. And then number three, the last part I think that's kind of helping, and that was hindered, is more people who look like Black and brown founders to be capital allocators. That's something that's been increasing, that you've been seeing as well. You've been seeing more and more Black and brown fund managers who understand it. And I'll leave with this. This is an importance of that. I never forget, 10 years ago, there was a young founder, no, it had to be 20 years ago. A young founder was pitching this startup about scheduling for a barbershop and a beauty shop. Scheduling, right? Those of us who have that experience understand the importance of that and how much that would be crazy. And we've seen startups here today. When they was pitching it, the investor said, I don't think women spend that much time in a beauty shop. And I'm looking like, are you kidding me? You must have never seen a Black and brown woman, because that is a total opposite than what it is, right? And so I think that had there been a founder of color in the room, they would have understood the cultural aspect of it and connect that capital to that opportunity. And so for me, that's why I kind of see it is the language, the geography of capital, and the people who are there as part of the capital allocators as the problems that have changed in order to get more communities capital as well.
Beautiful.
Let me take a little piece, because it is, a big question. Right? So I lead the Entrepreneurship Center at Rutgers Business School. We've been in existence for about 11 years. 70% of the entrepreneurs we work with are people of color, largely African American. Something we're really proud of is the fact that about 40% of those entrepreneurs now generate more than $1 million a year revenue. Some at 10 million, some at 1.01 million. We use the $1 million mark as a threshold. We all know $1 million is not the end all be all, but it's the first time when we know the entrepreneur has some customers, some validation of product, hopefully some owner's comp, maybe can talk to a bank or investors. So it's a threshold. So we have programs that are focused on startups and trying to have, big, exits and unicorns, but at its core, the focus on is the everyday entrepreneur, trying to help them get to $1 million of recurring and to continue to grow, right? So I think part of the answer, and again, a big question to your answer to your question is 2% of entrepreneurs are Black people and 13% of the population. Why? I think there's an answer for the entrepreneur, and there's some answers as it relates to the capital provider, right? So for me, with the entrepreneur, I always, start with the thing of what's investable, right? How do you create, and that's some of what was just alluded to. How do you create a project or a concept, and how do you structure it to make it investable? And I think that has two components. One part I think many of us are very good at, the narrative and the numbers, right? So it's like, here's the story, here's the problem I'm trying to solve, here's the community, here's where there's need. And where we spend a lot of our time is not really helping people necessarily with the narrative, it's helping them with the numbers so that people can say, if I invested, here's how I get my money back, here's the expectation, here's the time, here's how I decided how much capital I need. Why is that logical, right? And breaking it down to as simple as possible so that you can say the project or the opportunity is an understandable investment. On the other side, to the investor, 2020 allowed us to be much more clear, urgent, and just sort of unrelenting about what the issue is. To the investor, I tell people all the time that, when I started my first business, everyone said to me, you got to go and do your friends and family round. You got to do your friends and family round. You got to do your friends and family round. And some of you have heard me tell the story before. So I went around to my friends and family and I got a round of applause, right? It wasn't as if they didn't support me. They weren't going to borrow $10,000 from their 401k because I promised them that I would give them $12,000 back, right? It just was, they supported me, but we just didn't have, the wealth to be able to invest 10 or 50 or 20 without it. And so when I talk to the investors now, I think there's a need or niche to almost institutionalize the friends and family round, to think about how to change the systems in some ways to create more flexible, patient, equity-like capital that's not even focused on tax. All the capital now is like, I want to have the big exit, and knock to that. We all do. I'm a member of angel groups, and we want the big exit. But is there any, there's grant capital, there's sort of impact capital, and there's the VC capital. Is there anyone, and can we expand the pool of impact investors that are willing to provide equity at a smaller return, patient, flexible equity-like capital, right? That impact investors, 2%, 3%, 4% type capital that will allow us to start to bridge that wealth gap. And so I spend a lot of time communicating with impact investors, how, why here, why now, in a way that hopefully will start to, bring those numbers up from 2% closer to, the actual population of our community.
All right, fantastic, thank you. Did anyone else want to chime in on that one? Sorry.
I'll just add one, if it's okay. One thing. So first off, Dr. Richardson, I love your point about the type of capital that's available in friends and family. When your friends and family don't have wealth, you're not going to be able to generate, a friends and family round. It's sort of absurd to think that way. And I even, regardless of people of color, I find that to be just a silly thought. right? The friends and family round is a vehicle for you to prove something about your business, and you need whatever capital you need to do that. It doesn't make it any, it's just harder for certain, for people of color to be able to do that. What you also said though, which is interesting to me, is, as an angel investor, you are in a tech company that's going to be a wild success. You're going to get diluted dramatically. And so I find it interesting that people who are in that game don't understand that there are other types of investments in entrepreneurs that have way better return profiles. And so I think there's a misunderstanding among investors to look at a business. If I take a business that's, somebody brought up, hair cutting, right? And I said, okay, I'm going to invest in creating a salon, and I'm going to put the footprint out there, and I know how many chairs I'm going to have, and I'm going to do all these things. That making an investment of $10,000 could churn out $10,000 in 3 years way faster than my investment in, Airbnb that took 12 years for liquidity to happen. So congratulations. 12 years ago, you invested in Airbnb, and you got, by the way, which was like investing in the probability of a lottery ticket at that level. Yeah, you got a big win, but unless you have the wherewithal to be making a lot of $10,000 bets that aren't going to come through over 12 years, did I mention 12 years? I don't have time for 12 years. So I think that there's a missed opportunity for us to educate investors that there's a capital return profile in some of these businesses that is incredibly attractive if you think about these businesses differently. And when you're talking at that level, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, that 401k point, people understanding, you're not going to get a great return right now on your capital. So if you can find a place where you could get a 5% return over 3 years, that's great. Your money market's not returning that today. But we have to educate investors that there are other classes of investment within the entrepreneurial ecosystem that are frankly better bets. And there's nothing quite like, whether it's brick and mortar or I'll say it this way, business models that are well understood to invest in, right? Like me, vacillating all over the place, trying to figure out the business model for my next giant tech company. Oy, right? I've done that my whole career, right? But, I know what a restaurant is. I know how it operates. I know what the metrics are. I know how to do that. So there's a lot of people who are creating businesses that have well-known business models that could be invested in. We just have to think differently about that capital strategy there. Not to take away from anything that you said, but it's just the venture tech fantasy land is just that. I don't care who you are or where you are in the country, having traveled around everywhere. It's like, all we need is capital here in Kansas City. I'm like, you're not going to have a giant success in Kansas City any more than you're going to have it in the Valley if your bet is an Airbnb outcome. Okay, so good luck.
Yeah, I tell founders all the time, that's a good point, Steve, Scott. I tell people all the time that, venture is like jet fuel. But if you're building a bus, you don't need jet fuel. Further, there's so many different other fuels that are out there that you can have to launch your businesses and to build businesses. So that being said, and then lastly, I'll leave the founders with this, those who are founders. There's this idea in media that fundraising and the amount you raise is celebratory. It's not celebratory, it's an obligation. You have an obligation to me as an investor. You have an obligation to your team. You have an obligation to the customers that you're going to serve. So, I just want to leave that two points with it as well.
Just real quick, just to tie it all up, I want to touch on just mindset and exposure. I deal with a lot of the younger kids, so like high school age. They don't even know what they don't know, right? They grow up some rougher neighborhoods and they see the drug dealer down the street with a nice car, or they see, they could go on the corner, sell bottles of water and cool. So giving back and paying it forward is breaking that mindset and that stigma that I have to look a certain way in order to do certain things. So all of that to say, it's so important to start there and get that exposure, that education, in order to really build that infrastructure for our youth and for our current, for our future entrepreneurs.
That reminded me of something just very quickly for those who are in academia. I also think that there's a measurement issue with the entrepreneurship that we see in Black and brown communities, which is a lot of it is very informal. Like you're pulling stats from people who are formally employed, but you have a lot of individuals who might have 25 people that they have as contractors that aren't showing up in those data points. So I think there's a lot more latent entrepreneurship going on in the marketplaces, but they're not showing up in the formal metrics. That's not to take away from the stats that you have, but I do think that there's an opportunity for us to invest more in some and understand those informal pieces. And so we saw this with the PPP loans, where a lot of, the BIPOC community didn't participate because they didn't know that they could. They didn't understand that this worked for them. They thought they had to have employees. No, you are an employee for yourself, right? Like and it was a huge missed opportunity. I was glad that the last round of legislation changed that and carved out a bunch and said, we're actually going to make sure we market to frankly, the businesses we were trying to save. The whole goal of the program was there. So I think there's a visibility metrics thing going on here that's a missed opportunity. And I point out those in academia because it's the kind of thing that has to get pushed on from a policy standpoint.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you all for your input there. To everyone who's out there watching, I hope that this next inquiry will address some of the questions that have been popping up. So the next question, I'll read it out. It'll set a little stage, and then hopefully it'll touch in pieces of the questions that some of you all have been asking in regard to resources, in regard to capital, in regards to some of the barriers to that as well. So the next question, we talk about understanding, and this is dear to my heart as well, because a lot of this research is powerful. It comes from Rutgers. So Rutgers Business School, and someone who I've been dearly missing. He died in the last few days, and it's been difficult, but his legacy and all of the things that he's done in terms of research and understanding entrepreneurship and business as it pertains to communities of color, it'll continue to live on. So Dr. Jerome Williams has a lot of prominent research that talks about some of those barriers. Some of his recent research does hidden camera investigations. So people who want to go into banks and try to get capital, same credit scores, same everything, clean academic research, all of the variables are consistent. The only thing that changes is your racial group, right? And then the story, it's not a spoiler alert. What happens, and this is captured on video, the ways that people are received, the different standards that are put in place for people from different communities. And it's deeply disturbing. And it does kind of touch on Chase Bank, JP Morgan, banks that have been publicly aired out in the last couple of years through recordings or other measures that have said, like, there are distinct differences in the way that we have access to some of these resources as well. So I want to start from that place and say, what are the recourses that people have? We know that this exists. There's no doubt about it. We've understood it for some time. We have research. We have everything that backs this perspective. So what are the things that we can do now? I mean, we've already established this. We clearly understand it's an issue. What's next? So how can we gain access to those resources? How can we get that capital? What are the things that we can do to get past that? Because we've talked a little bit about the fact that it does exist. It's here. I want to say, what are some of the solutions and what can people do? That's some of the questions that I've seen popping up in the chat box. How do we gain access to it? What are those resources that are available? What are some of the grants, the investment opportunities that we can get in our businesses for our communities, if maybe that's an area that has prominent barriers?
Yeah, good question, and I'll be very quick, and I have three. Number one, I'm a huge advocate for public-private partnerships, and there's a lot of government money that's out there. I used to be at a university as well. I was at University of California, Riverside, where I worked with a lot of different investors there, and I started the incubator out there in the Black and Brown community. There's SBIR funding, STTR funding that's from the United States government that you need to have, to the point to where, to Dr. Richardson was talking about their friends and family round. That's the round that I always tell founders of color to go ahead and get. The government is your friend and family. Get money from them. There's a lot of grants out there. Grants.gov is another area. I'm a former banker. I spent 10 years at Wells Fargo. Regardless to what the CEO of Wells Fargo said, he couldn't find people who looked like me. I was there in the 90s, early 2000s. If you're in Los Angeles, One United Bank. If you're in Atlanta, Greenwood Bank. What I'm saying is Black-owned banks. Go there. If you're of the Latino community, the Latino Latinx banks that are out there that we could definitely name it. If you ever look at me on LinkedIn or Twitter, I'll give you those as well. You know, there are other opportunities that are out there, and I'm glad that we're finding this place to that. So you as an entrepreneur of color, don't be afraid to go to these other institutions of color to do business with them. That's how they get bigger, and that's how they can grow. Stop wasting our money in these others. And I'll be very real and very honest about this. And then the third piece of that I think is really important for us is to be collaborative. Be collaborative. I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. The reason I say that is because we've seen the power and the glory of the Divine Nine with Madam Vice President Kamala Harris with Alpha Kappa Alpha. Those of us who are in these fraternities and sororities, we need to understand that there are power in numbers, and there are power in numbers from there. We've seen that. So that being said, there are power in numbers in what you do as well. And there are some opportunities to self-fund. There are products out there like Republic. There are products out there like Seed Equity, all these other things that provide what's called equity crowdfunding to allow you as a founder or entrepreneur to get different type of capital, whether it's reward based with Indiegogo or anything like that, or the equity based. So those are the three actionable items I would say is crowdfunding, go to the minority banks, and looking at government funding from SBIR and SGTR.
Wow, awesome, amazing, thank you.
So I'm an alpha.
Oh,
I'm joking. I'm joking. No, let me just add.
I'm a huge fan of Amiri Baraka as a former poet. Shout out to Rutgers. That's all I have to say.
Very cool. Very cool. No, I say that in jest. So first of all, Dr. Jerome Williams, a legend, a giant, a humble guy, helped 1,000 people. And his research, has advanced the world, advanced the race as well. Can't say enough about him. He was a research director for the center that I lead. He was interim director before I came. So just a giant of a man. So absolutely. I say all that to say, in almost every community, there is a university-based program, a local economic development corporation-based program, an SBDC, and so and some are better than others, right? But you sort of get in where you fit in. You find someone that responds to your energy and can add value to your idea. So there's just a host of resources. So in every community, just do entrepreneurship support organizations or university-based programs, and just start there. That's for people who are just trying to figure out, how do I get from point A to point B? To people who are in the rooms, in the power rooms, I'm asking us all at the power table to pose this question. How do we change the system? What's the systemic changes needed so that more capital can flow to entrepreneurs of color? What do we need to do different? Right, just start from scratch, right? And let's just have a brainstorming of systemic changes needed to foster more entrepreneurship. And you know how brainstorming works. You throw the ideas out, 5 of them are so out of the box, 2 of them are not aggressive enough, but hopefully there are 2 of them that will. And when I've been doing that over the last few months, I've been seeing, one new idea of doing something different. We do, the insanity. Do what you always done, you get what you always got, right? All this capital now, even the big macro announcements, going to CDFIs. I'm not hating on CDFIs, but I think we need to do something else besides CDFIs, right? CDFIs have been around for the last 25, 30 years, and we still have the disparities that you mentioned earlier. So when we're in these power rooms, whether it's education or boardrooms or economic development discussion, I'm just challenging all of us to say, can we just have a session, an hour, 10 minutes, a retreat? What systemic changes are needed to bring more capital, to create more opportunities for entrepreneurs? How do we do something different, right? That's gonna make it better for us. So I'll stop there. So I see the time running down.
Okay, so real quick, I'll say, just trying to bring it back fundamentally, it starts with a problem. It starts with adding value. And you really have to, in my opinion, shop that idea, that problem, that solution, whatever you develop, in front of 30 people before you move forward. So before you even think about capital, make sure you come correct. Make sure your house is secure, where you try out a business proposal. And these resources are online, right? This is an age where it's at our fingertips. You can search for a template for a business proposal. There's so many tools, QuickBooks, Honeybooks, Microsoft Excel, any and all of these things. If you have your balance sheet together, if you have your solution together, I'm a firm advocate of somebody will be able to discover you, or you can make yourself discoverable, and they will help you out. So I'll stop there.
Have about 2 minutes left if anyone wants the final word.
I don't know if I want the final word, but everything that you said is important. Look, I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm sure this is true with people of color, is you have relationships as a customer. So when I think about bank relationships, I love the idea of, hey, go build a bank relationship with your personal life, of making sure that you're actually making deposits. Doesn't have to be much, and start to build that long-term relationship with a financial institution. That's sort of 101 stuff that anybody who wants to build credit or anything else needs to do. But so often, there's either mistrust of those systems, which is completely fair and understandable, which is why going to a community bank or one that's led community of Black-owned banks or Latinx-owned banks is so smart. And you've got to put the investment in, and a lot of investment happens through those relationships, and you have to have somebody on the other side advocating for you, not taking away any of the bias that's definitely there, but in an environment where, to DJ's point, where you're going in with a buttoned up plan and you've got a receptive audience, it's also a numbers game. Somebody's going to have to take a risk on you, and somebody has to take a risk on everybody. And I might be a middle-aged white guy with a long track record. I can assure you that knocking on a lot of doors, you knock on a lot of doors. It doesn't just, you don't go to San Francisco and pry bricks of gold out. Like, you've got to do the work. We just have to smooth the path and make sure that there's receptive on the other side, so that you get good feedback and there's an opportunity there.
All right. Well, you all, sadly, well, look, all good things must come to an end. So it's not sad. Let's celebrate the information that we were able to acquire today, the knowledge that we were able to disseminate. Thank you sincerely to all of the panelists who took time to be here today. Thank you to everyone in the crowd who joined in and logged into our session today at Equity Summit 2021. Deeply indebted to everyone for your time and being here today. You could be anywhere in the world, anywhere, especially now that we're on Zoom. You could travel and be anywhere, but you took time to log in and to be with us today. And that's the highest honor that we can think of. So thank you, everyone who tuned in and who was here today. Please do not forget to fill out your questionnaires. You'll receive a link for that survey. And please give us feedback. Let us know what you think about the Equity Summit 2021 and about this session in particular. Love, respect, and empowerment to everyone who was here today, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Absolutely.
you all. Great to meet you all, fellow panelists. I'll be reaching out via LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Good job, Joshua. That was phenomenal.
Yeah, nice job, Josh.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye.